Hi, my name's George Kenny. I'm a systems engineer for Veeam Software, and I want to demo today some of our capabilities around failing over virtual machines or replicating virtual machines, failing them over from what would be potentially a production site to a recovery site, and then also failing back that whole sequence and how to manage it, why it's important, and really how to automate it and report on the success or failure of those particular activities. So I'm going to do this running on VMware, okay? And I have a very small lab set up. It's a home lab, nothing particularly splendid. And I'm assuming you are familiar with our software already. Maybe you've created a few backups in the past. So I'm going to run through and create a replication job, okay? So we'll give it a default name, replication job 4. I'm going to tick this box, different IP address scheme, okay? Now, the idea here is that if you have a production site and a recovery site, the chances are that you may have a layer 3 routed network between those two geographies. So you may have a stretched layer 2 network which you can ping traffic across quite happily. But if you don't have that and you've got a layer 3 routed network, you're going to have IPs that are unique at the recovery site and not attached to your specific virtual machines. Realistically, if you boot the virtual machines from a replica, the IPs that were at site A are going to be no good to you in site B. So we're going to tick that box. We're going to go next. We're going to add the objects that we want to actually replicate. So I'm actually going to do this on an individual basis. I'm going to do one VM today. Now, you could do a number of VMs here. You could actually select a ton of VMs and add them all in. I'm actually going to just cherry pick a particular VM that's running for me now called GK Lab VM01. I'm going to add that in. Okay. You can see he's only small. He's running a Windows 2012, I think, on there. And we're going to choose the destination. Now, in the destination, it's asking us to choose a hypervisor. So the main difference between backups and replicas in Veeam's world is that backups land on disk, okay? And they are a unique and referenceable record of a state of a VM at a point in time. That's what a backup is. And we land that down to a disk. With a hypervisor, or with a replica, I should say, we do exactly the same process, okay? We capture the data in the same way, but we actually save that data down to a hypervisor and store it as a offline or cold virtual machine living in the inventory so that you can essentially spin up those virtual machines far, far quicker, okay? Now, this is the stage where we want to actually punch in the details around the IP addressing for the VMs that are going to fail over. Now, I've already prepared an IP for the VM that we're going to demo this with, and what I'm going to do is actually asking me for the source IP. So you might think, why is it asking me for the source IP? Well, we have the ability in the Veeam software to actually fail over. So this is our source site, and we have the ability to fail over and bring up that virtual machine with a new IP. But the trick here is that when we fail back, okay, when we fail back from the recovery site back to the production site, we're going to want to map this IP, this unique IP. And this is done on an individual basis in this particular demonstration here, but you could do this as a mask. You could say, for example, all my IPs are the same throughout both sites, but I want to change the third octet to a .10, and that would do that across all of those individual particular VMs that you're replicating in that group. So let's just actually go and check out that specific VM in question. If I launch up my VMware and have a look at that VM that we're looking after, let's close these down because I had this open earlier, and just go into him, see what is actually going on here. Log into him and actually take a peek at the IP address of the network card. So it's .26, and you can see I've got a DNS server in here of .38. So I'm actually going to take a quick screenshot of that because we might want to compare it later on when we've changed that mapping across, okay? And if I go back to my wizard here, I'm changing the DNS server on this example to .1. So I'm changing it from 38 to .1, and we're changing the IP address from 26 to .77. So we've got a couple of changes in there that will be good for us to test around with. It wants us to give a new suffix name because theoretically we want to be able to identify the label of the object when we map it over, or the VM. So I'm going to call that replica, I don't know, 77, because the VM IP address is 77. And we are being asked for restore points to keep. So if you think about backups, you normally keep a library or a history of individual backups. Same applies in Veeam for replicas. If you have a site-wide outage or site-wide corruption, ransomware or virus attack, you probably don't want to go to the most recent replica state. You might want to go to an hour beforehand. So we have the ability to create a number of replicas within inside the software, okay? Advanced button here, I'll just show you what's in there, but I'm not actually going to change anything on today's demo. Okay, let's move forward. Next, source and target proxies. Let's ignore that for the moment. We can actually use WAN accelerators, which I'm not going to do, but we also want to tick this box and get application aware image processing. So we're going to log into that particular VM and we're going to query the applications that live within inside it. We need a login to do that, of course, but if that VM's running AD, SharePoint, Oracle, Exchange, for example, then obviously we're able to get a very comprehensive and application aware backup and replica of those particular objects. So very mature approach to how we do that. I'm not going to set a schedule, okay, but I'm going to go apply and I'm going to tick this box at the bottom that says run the job automatically when I finish. So let's go finish and let's see what's going to happen. We'll see that an active task is going to drop into here. Replica job 4 is going to start, and with Veeam we have this nice unique panel here that shows you an active task, comes up with a nice list of all the things that are happening either per job or per VM. So if I click off that, it will show me the per job. If I click on the VM, maybe there'll be a list of VMs in here, it will show me what's going on at that moment in time. And if we go over to VMware, we can actually see that there's going to be some activities that are going to start here now, because what's actually going to happen is that VMware is now being instructed to take a snapshot of that VM. Okay, ignore my environment, it's a bit messy. Take a snapshot of that VM, and that will give Veeam the ability to actually create a replica of that and land that over at the target hypervisor, which is exactly what we want to do. So we can see that's going to tick along there. The VM is 20 gigs in size, so it's probably going to take, depending on your environment, it's going to take, 3 or 4 minutes to actually do that operation. And I've actually got a couple of constant pings running here. Let's just have a look at them. So I'm pinging the live IP and I'm pinging the soon-to-be IP. Nothing's going to happen in the replication process because all we're doing right now is seeding the target hypervisor with the data. You'd have to create, which is the second part of this video, a failover plan to automate that. So this can take a few moments. We'll speed the video up and we'll come back in a second and see how this process has actually come along. Okay, so job is completed. We can see that we have a bit of a summary here and all the things that took place. Click on the VM, it'll actually tell us a bit more detail there, which is good. So if we close that off, we can now see that if we go to our replicas, we can find that VM. You'll have to excuse me, I ran this a few times already and with a number of other VMs. This is our job, we called it replication job 4, okay? And also we can see over in VMware that we actually have that VM living as a offline VM that was named Replica 77. Okay, and in here with the actual replica itself, we can actually choose to do some quite creative stuff even before we've created a failover plan. And the failover plan is the automation piece. Okay, so we can failover now. This will essentially just execute a command to say bring that virtual machine up. We can say planned failover, and this will give us the ability to add additional VMs into that schedule. We don't want to do that. We can add to a new failover plan. We can start actually going to query that object, that replica, and actually use it as a source for restoring data. So almost like a backup, okay? And then we can do some things down here, remove configuration, delete from disk if we just didn't want to do that. That's absolutely fine. So we're not going to do that just at the moment. We're going to add to failover plan. We don't have to do it this way. We could go to the top and we could go for failover plan, new failover plan for VMware and add it that way. There's no really right or wrong way. Just right click on him, add to failover plan, new failover plan, and we will call it FOP4 because I think our job was called 4. And we've got some script options here, so we could, if we wanted to prepare the environment in advance, we could tick on that box and point at a VBS script or maybe some PowerShell and run some pre-application preparatory things. And also in the back end, we could also clean up some operations at the back end. Not that often. do you need to do that? But they're there if you need. So we go next. Our VM's already been put in there, and we can actually add additional VMs if we need to. And then we have the ability to set a delay. So if we want to set up a maybe more of a sensible routine when those virtual machines fail over, you probably don't want them to all come on at the same time. Number of reasons for that. If you did that, then you'd have a boot storm and you'd put a significant load on the hypervisors and the storage and all the other resources in the environment. But also you might have dependencies from an application level. So you might want some SQL servers to come on first and then have the application front end boxes to come on afterwards. So if I actually go and look at one of the failover plans I'd already created, we can see here there's one with 13 objects in it. If I go edit, we can see here in the virtual machines that I've specified a different range of timings for those VMs to come online. You just click on it, set delay, and you can also move certain applications up the order as you see fit. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, so let's go back to slight detour there. Let's go back to creating that failover plan that we wanted. Add to failover plan. We actually never created it in the end. Not a major problem because it was pretty straightforward. And next, our VMs there, apply, finish. Now, we've already got quite a lot of sort of tools at our disposal here. So what does the failover plan do for us? Well, the failover plan gives us a couple of options. We can go start to, and that allows us to select a specific point in time whereby we know we had a problem in our environment, say at 3 p.m. on a given afternoon, and we know that we want to go back to a previous point from that time. So, maybe your replicas work every hour, so it would go back to the 2 p.m. replica. Okay, so you could do that. But realistically, when you go to create those failover plans, they can actually be combined out of a number of applications. So you might replicate everything in your environment, but you might want to create a failover plan for maybe the databases, and a failover plan for the applications, and a failover plan for maybe the HR department. So you can really tune how your automation of your failover is actually going to work, not only to the recovery site, but also back from it. Okay. So let's click on start with this. This is actually going to kick off the failover plan. It's going to basically just only focus on that individual VM that we had, okay, GK Lab VM01. Let's bring up those two ping requests, because what this is actually going to do now is it's actually going to tell that virtual machine to come online. And, in all fairness, you could have gone to VMware directly and you could have right-clicked on this virtual machine and said power on. You could do that. If you lost Veeam, you could do that. It's not a problem. But really, it's best to do it within the Veeam console, because we keep that automation in place. We also have the ability to fail back, so you can do that within the Veeam console. So you want to keep it inside that management interface. And also, all this re-IP addressing is done within Veeam as well. So I think we just saw it there while it was ticking along. If we click off this, you'll probably be able to see it. I think it's actually still running. Let's have a look at him. So we can actually see there the IP address rules got applied. I don't know if the virtual machine is started. Perfect timing. So we can see there that virtual machine was, that IP was not responding, and now he's come online. But also, when we did the replication, we had the option to connect this to a separate network. Okay, so theoretically, we've connected the same VM to the same network at the moment in time, but you could create it to a masqueraded network. You could power off the source VM as well. So theoretically, you could do a passive DR test, bring those virtual machines up, and get a test report from it. Let's actually go and look at what actually happened then for those replicas. If we go and look at our job log, that might be quite interesting. If I go into here, we can see here that we actually have report, so we can actually see what has been going on for a specific job. This is quite important because you want to be able to prove that your DR works. You may have to, rather than just shrugging your shoulders and saying, yeah, of course it works, you actually have the ability to generate some quite useful reports on this. You can dive a lot more out of this from Veeam 1. Veeam 1 will give you a much more comprehensive report around that reporting. I might touch on this at the end. So there we go. There's a particular report for a subset of replicas, and it'll cover the history. Maybe they didn't work, so it'll report that as well. Failed to write data because we ran out of capacity. So yeah, quite a comprehensive reporting technology you've got in there as well, which is handy. And let's go and look at actually what's happened now in VMware. We can see that our VM has actually come online. So let's go and check them out and actually see what it's done with that network card address, because that was one of the things that I was sort of banging on about being quite a cool technology to use. Let's log into the VM. So he's come on from a replica. He has been automated with that failover plan. He's had the IP address changed. So let's see if it's actually worked. We know he's responding on the network because we can see it doing it here, which is great. Obviously, the VM is saying that it went off in an ungraceful state. That's, of course, the case because we took a snapshot. If we go and look at the network card settings as opposed to what it was set in the first place, we'll actually be able to see what the changes have been. And there's no driver we needed to inject, there's no additional software we needed to put into the VM. This is all agentless. I've just disabled the network card, which ain't great. Let's turn it back on. Go properties, and we'll look at the network card address. Fantastic. So we can see the differences here. So I set in the first place the 26 address as being the source IP. That's now been changed to .77. But more importantly as well, we can change all those other credentials like the gateway, like the subnet mask, and the DNS server. So the DNS server was 38. I've now changed that to .1, and I've got 2 DNSs on my network, so there's no particular problems there for this particular VM. So let's assume that users log in and they make changes, because that's what's going to happen. In the first instance, they are going to log on and they're going to start adding data to the databases, to the environment, to the infrastructure. So, these changes are going to be recorded down to those VMDKs, and you don't want to lose that information. So we've got that in the software to be able to fail that data back. Obviously, we can see the reports in these here. Let's actually go and look at our replicas and see what's actually going on here. Let's go and choose the correct one, of course. So in here, we've got some interesting things here now. We can actually go undo failover. That will just sever the tie between the target VM, delete the VM that we don't need, and return it to a cold offline state. And basically, the source VM just still continues to run. More importantly, what we can do is this fail back to production. So users have changed data. We can launch into the wizard. We can select our VM, okay, from the source data center, and then we're presented with these options. So probably the most relevant one in a real DR situation is the first option, fail back to the original VM. This is actually going to copy the delta changes, those individual changes that have been made at the recovery site, and bring them back as a delta file back to your original site. Okay, so it's going to be quite light. If you have a 100 gig VM or 100 terabyte VM, let's say, and users log in the event of DR and they make 10-20% of change, we're only going to need to bring back that 10-20% of change back to production. We don't care about the original data because it's still in situ, presumably. Obviously, if you lost your entire site, you would have to fail back the entire VM. So fail back to specified location, and this would bring the entire data set back with us. So that would take a lot longer to bring that data back, okay? But obviously it's going to rehydrate the entire virtual machine from the original site, okay? We can go next on this. This is probably the easiest option because it cuts out a lot of the choices we have available to us. We'll go next, and it's just going to go through now, speaking to VMware to actually understand where that data is, using change block tracking to identify those changes that have been written down to those VMDKs and bring that back across the wire to our production vSphere host. So you can see that it's going to say, look, my replica VM will be powered off for the duration of a failback, okay, because it's going to turn that off for us to bring those changes back across the wire to our target VM, to our production site, and we want to power on that VM afterwards as well. So let's go finish on that, and we should be able to monitor how successfully that works in the background. One of the things that we'll notice is that this IP address will probably go off. Okay, now whilst that's doing that, I think the final thing to show you is really that's the failover plans buttoned off there really. One of the things I do want to show you is really how we can actually get some quite comprehensive reporting out of Veeam 1 for this. So let's just log into our Veeam 1 server and actually see if we can report on this and see what happened. If you're being asked to prepare maybe some reports for the business in terms of how successful is the environment, is our DR plan working well, are we meeting our SLAs? So, if you're saying to the business, we can fail over within an hour and fail back within an hour, you want something to be able to prove that. So the Veeam one console will give you some quite interesting information here. It's very deep, it has a broad scope. I just want to show you very quickly a report on the failover plans. So it's going to give you a nice report you can kick out to your management team and show them how well this orchestration of applications and failover to and fail back from production to secondary site is working without really having to get your hands dirty. So let's just wait for that to work. We can still see this ping is still going on in the background. And yeah, here we go. We have some quite interesting information here with all different failover plans we have, the objects that are contained in them, and then we can move forward and drill into this and get a bit more of a detailed information about these, what delay gets hit for each of those applications, and span them out and actually drill in a bit further and actually see what's going on. So some quite comprehensive reporting there within Veeam 1. I recommend you check it out and look at that alongside Veeam for not only just the failover, but also the backup reporting, capacity management as well. So I'm going to end the video here. Obviously, this is going to continue running that failover plan. We're going to see that wind down, and then eventually this IP will trail off. But I think you've seen already that it's quite a powerful tool set. Used in the correct fashion and designed in the correct way, you can get some very handy protection for your site, not just from a backup perspective, but also when you're failing over from your production site to your DR recovery sites. So that's everything. I hope that was successful, and I hope you've learned something. Any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me.